All right, welcome back again. Our last video was all about the impact of trauma on marriage. And today we're going to talk about how to heal trauma in marriage. I really look forward to getting into this with you because so many relationships are impacted by relationships that have gone before and traumas that are associated with those relationships that shape the way that we think, the way that we feel, and that we act in the present day. And today I want to talk with you a little bit about how you can do some healing in such a way that we can get back to the core of the relationship with your partner today, removing that trauma from that relationship and finding hope and healing and fulfillment in your present relationship. So stay tuned. All right, how to heal trauma in marriage. Now, if you didn't get a chance to take a look at our previous YouTube video, The Impact of Trauma on Marriage, take a look at that video. It's a nice precursor to this one as we go into a lot of detail about the types of trauma and the various different ways that trauma can impact marriage adversely. And I think you'll find that very informative, especially if you or your partner have been through some trauma in the past. It's helpful to take a look at some of the impacts that may be having in your present and the effects that it can have on your current relationship today. But today is going to be all about healing. Today is all about how do you take those history and experiences that we've been through, and how do you go through a healing process in a way that works those impacts, those negative impacts out of your relationship and helps you have a stronger connection with one another in the present day. So I want to begin with this concept that trauma must end for healing to begin, right? And I bring this up because if you're experiencing ongoing trauma, in other words, trauma that continues to happen, continues to occur, our first and foremost objective is to end that trauma, right? Before we start focusing on how do we heal now and recover from the trauma, we first want that trauma to end. Now, if that trauma is happening in a relationship that you are currently in, our goal becomes how do we end that traumatic experience? And sadly, sometimes that means how do we end that relationship, right? How do we get you out of that relationship in a way that you're not continuing to experience that trauma over and over again? But if leaving the relationship's not going to be the answer, then for sure the next answer needs to be how do we put an end? How do we put a stop to that trauma that's happening in the relationship? Now, trauma can happen in several different forms. Trauma can happen in the form of verbal abuse, right? When an individual is tearing down intentionally the self-esteem and the wellness of their partner, they're belittling, they're demeaning, right? And their goal is malicious. They have a malicious goal. They're not just in conflict with one another and saying mean things. They have a malicious goal to tear down the self-esteem of another, right? That would be verbal abuse. It would be a form of ongoing trauma that could be happening in the relationship. Another one could be in the form of physical abuse, physical violence, right? And if not physical violence, at least physical posturing, which just means using physical intimidation to control or to hurt another person, using physical contact to hurt another person, right? Abusive physical behavior is another form that it can take. And finally, it can take forms in sexual abuse, right? Sexually pushing boundaries and participating in activities and behaviors that hurt or demean. So any form of ongoing trauma that way in a relationship. The other way that it can happen is outside of abuse. This can happen in the form of betrayal. So betrayal traumas that could be happening in the relationship, right? A partner that continues to cheat emotionally or physically on the relationship, right? They continue to step out and form inappropriate connections and relationships with others. So whatever form that this trauma can take in your present relationship, if trauma is happening in your relationship, our first objective is to end that trauma, which might mean either ending the behavior in the relationship that's being traumatic or leaving the relationship that is traumatic, right? Now, I'm going to put several resources up here on the screen for you to take a look at that can help you take some of those steps to get out of that relationship that may be being abusive to you, creating trauma in your relationship. Again, my heartfelt desire is relationships need to be safe before they be healthy and whole, right? And if the relationship can't be safe, our first objective is to get out of that relationship. Trauma must end for healing to begin. So most couples that I work with, they're actually dealing with trauma from previous relationships that are having ripple effect into their marriage now. So this type of trauma could be parents or siblings, right? Individuals that I grew up with, relatives, sometimes friends or classmates, right? Sometimes boyfriends or girlfriends that I grew up with and that I had relationships with when I was younger. And sometimes it's previous partners, right? Previous marriages or previous intense relationships that I've had in my past, right? Or other events that I've been through. It can be a variety of things that have happened that are now impacting their relationship today. That oftentimes the trauma that's causing problems in my relationship today is being perpetuated from other relationships of the past. And I haven't learned how to separate the trauma from those past relationships out of my current interactions with my partner. So now that the trauma has ended, how do we go through some steps that can help heal that trauma in our relationship today? And I'm going to divide this into 3 categories: the mind, the emotions, and the behaviors. And let's begin with the mind, right? Let's take a look at the healing of the mind in the marriage today. So the first thing that we want to do is identify the trauma perceptions. Now you'll remember from our last video, right, that trauma can oftentimes affect the way in which a person sees himself and sees the world. It'll skew the way they see themselves, and it'll skew the way that they're seeing others in the world, right? And our goal is to understand the impacts that the trauma has had on the way that you're perceiving, right? The way in which your mind sees yourself in the world. Now you'll remember from the last video that depending on the type of trauma I've experienced, it can have different types of impacts on the way that I see, right? Some people see themselves as not worth much. Some people see their partner as somebody that they'll probably lose, a high probability that I'll be discarded. Sometimes people become needy in their mind, right? Sometimes people become hesitant and self-doubting in their mind, right? Depending on the type of trauma you've been through, you may have different impacts on your perception. And our first goal in this mind category, healing the mind, is understanding what are the trauma perceptions and how's that different from the way that I might normally see myself or think about the world. We want to separate those out, right? And the reason we want to do that is so that you can understand when you're having a trauma response in your mind. If we don't ever label it as a trauma response in the mind, then I might just believe the thoughts that I'm having. I may foreclose on them. That's the word that we use in psychology, which just means that I don't test them out. I'm not curious about them. I just decide that they are true and that they are real. And when I decide that those thoughts are true and real that might be associated with trauma, I'm likely to embrace trauma reactive thinking, right? Thoughts that are coming out of trauma. And we know from our previous videos that where my mind goes, so will my emotions go. And where my emotions go, so will my behaviors go. Which means that I can literally start to feel trauma responses in the here and now, even maybe when trauma has ended, because my mind is continuing to think according to the dictates of the trauma, right? So this is our first step in healing the mind, is we want to understand the impact the trauma has had on the way you see yourself and the way you see your world. Ask yourself that question. How do I see myself different? And what are some ways in which I might see others or the world bigger than me different because of the trauma that I've been through? And then practice step 2 as you go through your week, identifying when your thoughts are outside of the trauma responses, right? When you're having thoughts that are more natural and normal to you and who you are and what you're worth, and thoughts that feel like they're being more dictated by the trauma. Those types of thoughts, right? That make you self-doubt or make you wonder your value or make you suspicious of the world or feel insecure around others. These are our first 2 steps, right? Understanding the impact that the trauma's had on the mind. And then second, understanding when you're in a trauma mindset and when you're in more of an inherent mindset, I call it, right? Which is just more inherently true to you. We want to create division between those 2, start to be able to separate them. Now, the third objective, once I start to recognize the difference between trauma thoughts and my inherent thoughts, is I want to start to adopt healthy thinking patterns for wellness. And this can be tricky sometimes without some mental health counseling, right? So I'm going to encourage you to get connected with a therapist if you know that there's been trauma in your past, to get connected with a mental health counselor if you never have before, and process with them, talk through with them some of the trauma that you've been through. A trained mental health therapist can do a lot of good in helping you understand the difference between trauma thinking and inherent thinking, and to help you recognize that thinking in your life and even process through and help heal some of those thoughts in a way that you can start to get back to your authentic and inherent mind state instead of the trauma response, right? So mental health counseling can be one of the first things that I would encourage for somebody who's recognizing that you've been through some trauma that's impacting the way that you think. Another tremendous resource is meditation and mindfulness practices, right? So meditation and mindfulness are ways, they're strategies in which individuals can practice getting attuned with their inherent self, right? Their authentic self, their inner self, the self that's free from some of the trauma and difficulties that we've gone through in life, getting connected back to me and myself, and maybe the universe a little bit bigger than me. And so meditation and mindfulness practices can be tremendous strategies to help heal your mind. And you can find hundreds of videos on mindfulness exercises and meditation practices on YouTube or in self-help books or through guided imageries. There's lots of resources this way if you seek out a little bit more information on mindfulness and meditation. But this can be a really great way to heal the mind and get connected back to yourself. Another suggestion that I would give is connect to a healthy support system. And what I mean by a healthy support system are people in your world that you feel value you, right? For all the good that you are and all the flaws that you have, they're in your corner, they have your back, and they value you, right? Connect with those people. And if you don't have any of those people, let's start to build some of those connections. All of us need to ground ourselves in others who can kind of see us clearly, right? Who are healthy enough that they can look at us and understand our value and also see some of the imperfections that we run into. They can help guide and direct us, but help keep us grounded as well in a mind state that's connected to who we inherently are and what we are inherently worth, right? So connecting with that support system can be another great way to help heal the mind. I hope your spouse is one of those people. And if they're not, let's work on your relationship to get there, right? We want your spouse to be one of those individuals that can help you ground into your inherent value and worth. And then finally, spiritual advisors can be super helpful in this way. If you find yourself religiously affiliated, right, or there's other people around you that you feel are spiritually connected that you can use as an advisor, spirituality can be a great way to kind of ground yourself into a bigger view of who you are and your place in the universe, the way in which you matter, right? The important mission that you're on in this life and the good that you can do for others. These are all tremendous resources that can help you heal your mind when you find that your mind has been impacted by trauma. All right, so let's switch to emotions. Heal the emotions associated with trauma, right? That's our second objective. We want to heal the mind and we want to heal the emotions. And the reason that emotions come second in our order is because you remember from the principles that I teach you that our emotions are impacted by our thoughts, right? Our perceptions inform our emotions. The meaning we attach to things tells us how to feel about things, right? So emotions that are connected with trauma are going to be a byproduct of the thoughts that are connected to trauma. We just got done discussing the mind. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the emotions that might come out of some of those trauma thoughts. All right, well, that's it for part 1 on how to heal trauma in marriage. And stay tuned for part 2. You're not going to want to miss it. As always, please like, subscribe, and share our content. And we look forward to being with you again soon. Take care.